All right, next up, vaccines across the state increasing every single day, but numbers are still low. And at this rate, Georgia may not reach President Biden's July 4th goal. Right now, we're averaging just under 32,000 a day in Georgia. This time last month, it was about 75,000 per day. That's a 58% decrease. Knowing this is important because 7% of people are still in between doses. 62% of eligible Georgians still haven't even gotten a vaccine yet. And the total number of vaccines administered is more than 7 million. That's an increase of nearly 9,000 from the day before. And the CDC monitoring cases of heart inflammation in young people who have received the COVID-19 vaccine. The condition is called myocarditis, and it's an inflammation of the heart muscle, a rare disorder that has been reported among some young people after they received the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And a CDC advising group found a handful of cases seem to occur primarily in adolescents and young adults, more often in males than females, more often following dose 2 than dose 1, and typically within 4 days after vaccinations. Now, physicians all across the country have been alerted by the Atlanta-based agency to keep an eye out for this condition. One cardiologist that we spoke with talked about how kids who have the rare condition are responding to the treatment.
The good news in talking with colleagues around the country is that most of the cases thus far reported of myocarditis in this population seem to be pretty self-limited in that kids respond well to treatment, don't need to be hospitalized for very long, and recover, from a symptom standpoint in just a couple of days.
Now, doctors say that if within a few days after having vaccination, especially the second dose, if your child develops chest pain or shortness of breath, go to the doctor. Chesley, over to you.